Well, turn back with me in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 3. Nehemiah chapter 3, and we want to do one more reading before we come to study God's Word. Nehemiah chapter 3, page 486 in the Pew Bible. So we ended chapter 2 there, as you'll, I trust, remember, with that resolution, we could call it, to get to the work of building. And here in chapter 3, we read about the building. Now, we're not going to read the whole chapter. It's a bit of a tongue twister. There's a lot of names in there, so bear with me. But we're going to read the opening 12 verses because it is significant. We learn truths that we'll see applicable to ourselves during the sermon. Let's read from verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its stores in place, building it as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zachar, son of Imri, built next to them. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah. They laid its beams and put its stores and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakkoz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshazabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, son of Baana, also made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa. But their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. The Jeshasa gate was repaired by Jehoiada and Paseah and Meshullam, son of Besoidai. They laid its beams and put its stores and bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by men from Gibeon and Mizpah. Melatiah of Gibeon and Jadon of Meronoth, places under the authority of the governor of the Trans-Euphrates. Uziel, son of Hariah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section. And Hananiah, next, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Rephaiah, son of Hur, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section. Adjoining this, Jedediah, son of Harumaph, made repairs opposite his house, and Hattush, son of Hashabbenaiah, made repairs next to him. Malchijah, son of Hiram, and Hashub, son of Paath Moab, repaired another section, and the tower of ovens. Shallum, son of Halosheth, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Amen. Back at the turn of the century, there were all sorts of wild and outlandish predictions being made. As the 21st century was approaching, various predictions and fears were floating around in public. You may remember the fear of the millennium bug. They feared that when the date of computers rolled from 1999 to 2000, that computers would crash worldwide. Shut down power grids, wipe out bank accounts, misfire nuclear weapons, and disable planes mid-flight. Others thought that the turn of the new millennium would awaken extraterrestrial life in space and that aliens would make an appearance. Others thought the machines would then overpower humanity. Even some Christians got caught up and claimed that at its dawn, Christ would return. And now, of course, as we look back at all that, we can smile at it and think how silly folks were to get so worked up about it. Back in 1999, our own denomination was looking to the millennium. Thankfully, they weren't thinking about aliens or the overpower of robots. Instead, they were anticipating the turn of the century in a very different way. The home section, which is part of the mission committee in our church, was preparing to publish a workbook called Rebuilding the Broken Walls. It came out in 2000. And it was a resource that was to aid the church in an honest self-evaluation of itself. The booklet sought to help congregations identify its strengths and its weaknesses. It was an attempt to shape congregations and the denomination's vision as we entered into the 21st century. 25 years on, and maybe some of you are thinking, where has the time gone? It's 25 years on now. The home section has produced another book, a book called Body Life. And it hopes to help the church members and churches complete what's called we could call a spiritual health check. It helps us grapple with the challenges we face as a denomination, as the Church of Christ in the modern post-Christian world. This book is designed to help us reevaluate the priorities of the church and what should be our focuses as we seek to reach an un-Christian world. God willing, over the next 6 months, each time that I'm with you, and the session in Drumbalga has very kindly agreed to me being with you once a month, I'm going to be helping you work through this booklet, which the rest of the denomination is also working through. Some have done it already, some are presently doing it, like Ballymoney. And we're going to work through the Body Life book. When I'm preaching the Lord's Day, we're going to lay the biblical foundation to each chapter that we'll examine then on a Tuesday night in a midweek. Now, we're not going to do that this Tuesday night because we have Andrew Kerr coming. We'll begin these studies come the new year, and we'll have a little bit of catching up to do at that stage, but we'll take January to work through this. And session would really encourage you to come to the midweek. If you don't ordinarily come to these, because these are really important as we look at the life and the well-being of the church and we think about the future of the church. Well, today we begin with chapter 1. Chapter 1, which asks the question, where are we now? Where are we now? When you get to a particular milestone in age, you like to go for a checkup at the doctor's, don't you? You get the doctor to go and give you a bit of a MOT, don't we call it? They'll do a full check over of your body to make sure that everything's okay. They'll check your obs, they'll maybe do bloods, they'll ask you some questions. And that, in a sense, is what we're going to do as a congregation over the next 6 months. We're going to go to the doctors, and we're going to perform not a physical health check, but a spiritual health check. And in this first study that we'll come to in midweek in January, we're going to look at the last 40 years of church life, in Ballymoney. And we're going to go through a series of questions and reflections as we evaluate the health of the congregation. What we want to do today is we want to lay the biblical basis for doing such a health check. We want to get some guiding principles as we go through this process through the next 6 months. And so we're going to look at Nehemiah today. And as we look at him coming back and seeking to revitalize the work of the church in Jerusalem, we find 4 guiding principles that should help us as a congregation as we evaluate church today. Our title is, Where Are We Now? And the first thing we find Nehemiah completing is a thorough inspection of her condition. A thorough inspection of her condition. If that's too long, the key words are in bold on each point for you, so hopefully that will help you. Have you ever had to travel a long distance? Well, Nehemiah did. He was in Susa, we read in chapter 1. He has to travel between 900 to 1,000 miles, not by plane, not by the nicest car, the SUV that can go cross-country and all those bumps wouldn't feel like anything. No, he goes on the back of probably a donkey, maybe a horse, given that the king had financed this trip. 900 miles. It would have taken him 2 to 3 months to complete that distance of journey. You think we can fly to the US in 5-6 hours? Reverend Kerr, who's here for the midweeks, an overnight flight got him 1,000 miles across the world to Northern Ireland. But when you do such a long journey, I imagine that, like me, you need a couple of days to recuperate. Maybe with age, you need a couple of more days. And that's what we find Nehemiah doing here. We read in verse 11 that once he arrived in Jerusalem, he had 3 days to recuperate. We're here in chapter 2, verse 11. He rests up and then he gets straight to work. But notice what Nehemiah does. Note what he begins with. He doesn't immediately get the cement mixer out and get guys mixing mortar and moving stones and start building the wall again. No, he doesn't immediately, nor does he immediately call a town hall meeting where he gathers everybody about and he talks to the citizens in the town and they have a big town hall meeting to plan what's going to happen. No. We read of what he did first. Verse 13. By night I went through the valley gate towards the jackal well and the dung gate, and he examines the walls of Jerusalem. He goes on a bit of a reconnaissance mission first. He seeks to seek out the lay of the land. He had been taking note of things such as the extent of the structural damage, the condition of the gates, which gates could they pass through and which gates could they not pass through. And that comes out as we read his account of his journey by night. He'd have thought about the engineering challenges. We read there of how part of the wall on the valley had fallen down and he couldn't pass through. And he would have been thinking about, well, how are we going to get builders in there? What are we going to do with all that rubble that's lying there? And what actually happens is that they change where the wall goes and they just leave the rubble lying. So they do, because it was going to be too much of a logistical nightmare. He'd have thought about what quantities of materials and where they were going to source these materials and how they would get it brought in. Would it have to be carried? Could animals draw it in? He'd have thought about the security vulnerabilities. I meant to read this verse, but the layout's a little different in the NIV, so I missed it. But there in verse 10, we're told, even as he arrives in Jerusalem, Sanballat the Horite, chapter 2, verse 10, Sanballat the Horite and Tobiah the Ammonite, they're not pleased that Nehemiah is here seeking the welfare of Jerusalem. And so he's already aware that there are these dissenting voices around that aren't liking what's going to happen. And so he thinks about the security vulnerabilities of how they might try to strike, what's most pressing to be done first to give security to the city. I'm not going to say it's anything more than a consequence, but strange that I became inter-moderator of Ballymoney on the 5th of September, and Kilray Bridge then closed on the 7th, and here I am trying to get back and forth from Drumbogue to Ballymoney. I did suggest to the elders that they could get me a boat to go up the Ban, but they said it wasn't in the budget, so I gave way at that stage. But you think of how much works went into Kilray Bridge there. How many specialists have had to come and look at that bridge, and they've went back to their desk and they've written up their reports, and somebody else has come in and they've done their little bit of work, and they've went and measured something and they've went back. Think of how long it's taken them to evaluate and form these reports and make decisions and to tender the work, and we still haven't got any work done yet on Kilray Bridge, and it's nearly Christmas. Yet here, in one night, Nehemiah does the work of an engineer, an architect, quantity surveyor, a security officer, a project manager. Nehemiah completes a thorough inspection of the walls. And at the end of it, he understood the extent of the damage. He had grasped something of the magnitude of the work ahead of them as citizens in that city. And I don't believe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here as we think about the thoroughness or the thorough inspection that Nehemiah completes. If we look at Nehemiah's own account as we've just read it in chapter 2, he labours this very point of his thorough inspection. In verses 11 to 16, he gives us considerable detail about his nighttime excursion. He could have just told us, I went out, I looked at the walls, and I came back, and I started work the next day. But he doesn't. Notice also in these verses, Nehemiah stresses that no one knew that he was doing this. Verse 12, we're told that he said, I had not told anyone what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. And then also verse 16, he repeats similar thing again. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because I had not yet said nothing to the Jews or the priests, the nobles or the officials or anyone else. Nehemiah first conducts a thorough inspection of the situation in Jerusalem, of the church, before he does anything else. Nehemiah's excursion was invaluable preparatory work. It was crucial because it meant that he knew the true state of affairs. He was able to devise a wise strategy. He was able to avoid early opposition. He could inspire trust. He could organize resources efficiently. He was able to mitigate the chance of failure. And most of all, he honored God through it, through good preparation. And Ballymoney members, that's the stage and the phase that we're in at this point in time. This is our first principle that we are to take note of and to bear in mind as we conduct this spiritual health check and we work through the body life. Before we can make progress and get to mixing mortar, so to speak, like Nehemiah, we need to complete a thorough inspection. And that's being done and needs to be done at various levels. There's personal responsibility here. There's self-evaluation that each of us needs to be doing about our own spiritual health. How's it going with you? Is it well with you and your soul with the Lord? Are you walking with God day by day in His Word and in prayer? Are you talking to Him, or is it like you're giving silence treatment to your Father in heaven? What's your level of commitment to the Church of Christ? Are you a seat warmer? Just here and you keep your pew warm on the Lord's day, or you putting your shoulder to the plough? Are you only here on the Lord's Day and we don't see you the rest of the week or even at evening worship? There's self-examination. There's congregational evaluation too. How healthy is the church? What's the strengths and weaknesses? What's the priority? What's the vision? What you'll get, you were supposed to get it today, I confess. I forgot the Body Life books. I set them in front of my door to trip over them as I went out, and I still managed to forget them. But I'll get the books to you, and you can begin looking through it before our first study in January. But we're going to work through it together as a congregation. We'll be asking these sorts of questions in the weeks to come. As a session, your elders have been busy at work, and fair play to them. They have begun assessing, they've begun reflecting, they've begun discussing, we've begun praying, we've begun planning for the future. And then there's even discussions that are happening at presbytery level as the presbytery looks at the life and the health and the well-being of our presbytery as a whole. At our November meeting, the presbytery established a committee to evaluate the health and the well-being of the churches in our presbytery, to strategically use our manpower to revitalize weak works and to strengthen our stronger works also, and to even be thinking about starting new works in the bounds of our presbytery. And so, church member, it's not that we're just coasting along here and that there's nothing happening. I suppose you could liken it to the night that Nehemiah was out. Nobody knew what was happening. They didn't see what Nehemiah was doing, but there was work being done. Things are progressing. You've received a schedule of preachers. You're now listening to men that are eligible or will be eligible to be called. Sessions doing its work, and they're meeting more regularly, monthly, if not twice a month, as they've done in some cases. Midweeks will begin in January, working through body life. And all these things we'll discuss, will frame our vision as a congregation going forward, so that you're ready to call a man, and God willing, he'll accept. Here we see Nehemiah. His excursion was invaluable preparatory work. There was need for a thorough inspection. But let's think secondly, and that's the longest point today, let's think secondly about an honest assessment of her condition. An honest assessment of her condition. The Chancellor got herself into some hot water, not just because of the policies that she announced, but she's being now accused of manipulating the figures. I don't have a maths degree. I'm not great at maths, so I'm not going to comment on that. But she's accused of misleading the public, of not giving an honest assessment of the financial state of our nation. Well, here, Nehemiah doesn't manipulate the figures. He gives an honest assessment when they finally do have that town hall meeting, so to speak, in verses 17 and 18. He tells them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. Nehemiah finds things just as Hananiah had told him. But notice that Nehemiah's focus here, as he evaluates the condition of the city and the church, he doesn't exaggerate, nor does he minimize. But notice also what his conclusion is about it. He's not worried about the security of the people. He's more concerned about the disgrace that is brought upon the people by the poor state of affairs. And as he thinks of that disgrace, it's not only just the people, but the dishonor that it brings to God's name. Jerusalem was to be the holy habitation of God Most High. It was to be, as the psalmist said in Psalm 84, how lovely is your dwelling place. There's nothing lovely about a war zone or a tumbled city. Think of those scenes that we've seen in Ukraine after the Russians have bombarded it with its drones and flattened whole areas of the town. It's not appealing. Jerusalem didn't look in a good state of affairs, and what was true physically was even truer spiritually. The deepest problem was not her insecurity, but the disgrace, the dishonor that it brought upon the name of God. It communicated that God was weak, that God couldn't protect his people, that God had abandoned his covenant, that God was not truthful. It reminded Israel of her sin and the judgment that God had brought upon her. It showed her spiritual brokenness, and it needed revitalized. It needed new life brought into it. She was the very opposite of what she was supposed to be, the praise of all the earth, Isaiah 62, the light to the nations, the symbol of God's holiness, that beautiful habitation of God. When you go to the doctor, you want the doctor to tell you the truth, I imagine. You want the doctor to tell you exactly how it is. You want them to correctly diagnose your health and how it needs to improve and the means for that improvement. Well, here Nehemiah gives us an honest assessment of the church's condition. And that's the second principle that we're learning here, Christian. As we begin this series in the body life, there needs to be an honest assessment of the condition. In our first study, we'll look a lot at statistics, the attendance at worship, the membership of a church, and we'll look at that over the last 40 years. And you probably don't need me to tell you what that figure is going to look like and what way the graph's going to be going. But as a church, we at times have a tendency to minimize things, to miss the true problem, to be given to maybe even sentimentality. That we look back at the good old days and we revel in bygone times. And that does us no favors because it distracts us from what is presently going on. And it warps our picture. We need an honest assessment. We need the truth to be revealed. And isn't it interesting? Nothing had changed in the condition of Jerusalem since before Nehemiah came. It was the way it had been since the Babylonians had left it and carried everybody off. Ezra had done a little bit of work in the temple courtyard and laid the foundation there with Zerubbabel. But the rest of the city had remained untouched. And yet it's when Nehemiah comes that things begin to change. And Derek Kidner, a minister in America, or was a minister in America, he makes this assessment. Sometimes it takes a stranger to see sharply what has been softened by familiarity. Sometimes it takes a new face to come in, new fresh eyes to see the reality of the condition, because those present there, like the people in Jerusalem, had become used to it. They'd been used to walk out the front door and see a hole through the wall and be able to see the whole way down to Tobiah the Ammonite camping out on the far side of the river. And we're wanting those fresh eyes, and we're praying to God to give us those fresh eyes. But there needs to be an honest assessment. Then more encouragingly, let's think of thirdly, there's to be a collective effort to her revitalization. There's to be a collective effort for her revitalization. The situation was dire. It was not looking good in Nehemiah's day, but they don't mope about it. They don't give up and say, well, this is the end of it. There's no point doing anything. The condition, the disgrace that it brought to God and to the people drove them to do something. To, as we would say, put their shoulders to the work or to the plow. Nehemiah's, their assessment, everything that they'd done to now, their inspection, their conclusions, had now drives them to do something about it. The people rally to him, verse 18, we're told. They say, Let us start rebuilding. And so they began this good work, Nehemiah tells us. And that's what we read of them doing in chapter 3. Maybe your eyes glazed over as we read all those names and places and the tongue twisters. But here in chapter 3, we're given a picture of them working the whole way around the city walls. If we had a map, I couldn't get a good enough map for the screen. You see each nearly gate around Jerusalem being fixed and the areas of wall being repaired in between. You can trace it all out, and the whole city is repaired in this one chapter as it's recounted. But notice who leads and heads it up. Chapter 3, verse 1. Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priests went to work. Elders, you're to take the lead. And that's what you've been doing over these last months. It's made my job as an intermoderator very easy as you have led and have followed a lead as well. We've been grappling with things, we've been discussing things, you've been thinking about things yourselves, you've been coming with ideas to the session meetings, and that's brilliant. The leaders of the church, the religious leaders, are to lead the congregation. The congregation see here that after we read about the priests, the religious leaders leading first in their work, the congregation, the people of Jerusalem, they follow in doing the work also. On this list of names that we read of in verses 1 through 12 is comprised of men and women. Look at verse 12. Of how Shallum, the son of Halosheth, his daughters help him. Young and old, I think we can assume that. The leaders and the people, we see the civil magistrates like Shallum there in verse 12, and also another in verse 9 leading. And these are civil magistrates that are involved in the work. We see that people, that their field isn't the building trade. They aren't brickies as we would call them today. They're goldsmiths and they're perfumers, verse 8. They even give themselves to the work. And amazingly, people even from outside the city, from towns further north than Jerusalem, they come down. We read of them in verse 7, coming and repairing and giving themselves to the work too. And maybe that's where we should see the presbytery and the rest of the presbytery's involvement in local works. This is the third principle. There's a collective effort here. Everyone is involved in the work of revitalization and rebuilding. It's not just the elders, it's not the minister or intermoderator, it's not left to the committee to do. Everyone has their part to play in being involved in it. And we as a session have been encouraged as we see many of you being involved in the life and the witness of the church. There are those of you who are wholeheartedly giving yourselves to the work. And I want to challenge those of you who aren't doing that yet to follow the example of your elders, to join with the other members in your congregation and give yourselves to the whole life and witness of the church. Did you pick up the scathing criticism of Nehemiah in verse 5 of chapter 3? We read about the men of Tekoa. They're building, they're giving themselves to the work, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. And actually, I think in fact, the ESV translates it even more scathingly. It says, but the nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. And I think there's a play in words there as it seeks that translation, not only their leaders, but also God himself, their Lord. Is that any of us this morning? Is that you will not stoop to serve? Is it your pride that's holding you back? Your selfishness of thinking about self? Is it bitterness against others in the church? Maybe it's because you're just disillusioned by the life and the state of the church. Or maybe it's worldliness, that you're caught up with the affairs of life and not the church of Christ. And that stops you stooping and serving. There needs to be a collective effort. The collective effort is what made the walls be rebuilt in 52 days and for the work to succeed. And there needs to be a collective effort from the whole congregation. Then finally, and I'll seek to be brief here, let's also be aware of the potential opposition. And this is important to keep this in, or else we maybe would have left it just because time is gone. But we're told twice about opposition that was mounting. I've drawn your attention already to verse 10 of chapter 2, where Sanballat the Horite and Tobiah the Ammonite, they were very much disturbed. We're told that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. They hated the fact that somebody was taking notice of the church and coming to revive the life of the church. The enemies of God don't like revitalization work. They're happy to see a church, a congregation die and whittle out. They were happy for Jerusalem to lie in ruins and there'd be a couple of people scattered throughout the city, but there was nothing really happening there, so they were happy to leave it alone. But when Nehemiah came to stir up the people, to do work, to even begin to examine the walls there at that stage in verse 10, they weren't one bit pleased that someone would care about the church and want its growth and progress. Is that you? Then verse 19. We're told also again, and things have escalated a little further. We're now told that it's 3 people are involved here. Sanballat, Tobiah, and now Geshem the Arab. Other people are circling round the church and they're seeking to oppose the work. And notice how they're doing it. They are mocking, we're told, and ridiculing it. They begin to spread lies, twist words and motives, and accuse them. They say, "Are you rebelling against the king? Do you have authority to do this?" And these sorts of lies had succeeded the previous time when Ezra had been involved in doing the work. But look at Nehemiah's resolution here, verse 20. "I answered them, saying, the God of heaven will give us success." Notice confidence there. "We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right." And here we have our final principle. When the church starts to look about revitalization, when a church looks at does a spiritual health check, there are the enemies that come out of the woodwork that seek to oppose progress, growth, and those who seek to promote the well-being of Israel, the church. And maybe the way that could be done is the reprising of what's happened in the past. Wrongs that maybe have been done. Issues that have been put to bed. Rulings that have been made by the church courts. I want to assure you again, the session is committed to moving forward. A new chapter has begun in September, and we are looking forward, we're moving forward, we're not looking to the past. And as a session, we are united and we are resolute about this. And so we want to commend those of you who are doing likewise. You're letting the past stay in the past and aren't trying to dig it up or stir up the water or seek to bring things up again. But if there's any of you out there that are attempting to be a Tobiah or to be a Sanballat, bring up the past and oppose progress, let me plead with you, for the sake of Christ's bride, let it stay in the past. Don't act like the enemies of God. Don't be an enemy of God. Instead, come to Christ. Give it to Christ in prayer. Leave it with Christ and let him be the judge of all the earth, for he will do what is right. And then move on. There's any number of TV programs about house renovations, aren't there? You could watch George Clark's Amazing Spaces, Nick Snowell's 60-minute makeovers, or Neil MacLeod's grand designs. And in the space of that 60-minute show that you watch with a couple of sets of ads through it, of course, you get to see the house go from a wreck and ruin or an empty site to the finished product. But it has to, behind the scenes, you maybe don't get to see this all. There's been a thorough inspection. There's been an honest assessment of what work needs to be done. There's been a collective effort to get that building work done. They've maybe even had to traverse various oppositions and barriers along the way. As we start out looking at Body Life Book, this is our spiritual health check as individuals, as congregation. And here Nehemiah gives us 4 guiding principles to govern our approach. And let's remember the confidence of Nehemiah. Verse 20 of chapter 2, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. Amen.